All right, we are at the top of the hour, so we will get started. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kelly White. I am a field marketing manager for Corteva. And thank you for joining us for Enlist's Weed Control System Best Management Practices webinar. So again, I'm your host, Kelly White. I will pass it over to Ron and Jared for introductions.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Ron Geis. I am a market development specialist covering the northern part of Iowa.
Hey, thank y'all for coming today. My name is Jared Walls. I am the market development specialist. I'm based in Tifton, Georgia. I'm covering the whole state of Georgia, Alabama, part of South Carolina, Florida, and Puerto Rico.
The ice belt today.
Right.
Exactly, in this cold weather. Um, so we're going to cover a lot of great information today. Wanted to just put up our disclaimer that when in doubt, if you ever have any questions, always look at the label. The label will give you the best information and really spell out any questions you may have. Today, we're going to go over frequently asked questions, best management practices, and we also have the functionality today in the Q&A chat section of Zoom. So please, if you have any questions, please type those into the chat and we will have two opportunities to answer your questions. So for the agenda today, we're going to start with the weed control system recap, how we did in 2025. We're going to go through some Enlist application updates. We'll then take a break to answer any questions in the chat that you may have before going to our second section on the second half of our webinar to talk through our general frequently asked questions that we've had throughout the years. We will wrap this up with a final Q&A session. So again, use that functionality in the bottom. As a reminder, there is one CEU credit for this webinar, and if you applied with this with your email, that should be credited to your account within 45 days. So with that, I will pass it over to Jared to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. So what we'll do first is we'll go kind of through some numbers here. Looking back at 2025, I know this team is very thankful to be working with this technology. We strive to bring value to the farmers every day. But as you see on the top here, our soybean trade is number one in the country with Enlist weed control. In 2025, we were on about 65% of the U.S. soybean acre. And again, looking at some of these talking points here, we know that we have an elite germplasm, and we're seeing improvements every year with the Enlist trait, whether that's in E3 beans. I know down where I am in the cotton belt, we're seeing advancements with our cotton varieties. Really excited about what we're bringing next year, and also with our corn hybrids. When it gets to the crop protection piece, we know we have something special with our herbicides. We bring near zero volatility and reduced drift. And one theme that you'll see throughout this presentation is the flexibility that we have with our chemistry. We have a lot to offer, very flexible, can go with glufosinate. We have more freedom to spray for applicators. So when you look at time restrictions, and different tank mix partners, we do offer a very flexible and more freedom to spray there. And one thing that I'm very proud of is that we are a reliable US-based company, and a lot of our production with our Enlist herbicides is based in the United States. Just a couple other things. Some of these are kind of some marketing themes that we've done throughout the years. We are very neighbor friendly, and we were launched very responsibly. That's another thing that I'm very proud of there too. We weren't rushing to the market. We weren't trying to be first. We were trying to do things the right way. So we work tirelessly with the EPA to try to get our products through the EPA in a responsible manner. And I think that's why you see that we have a product to spray, and we are very flexible in our application. We've been looking at this product in universities and third parties since I believe 2004. So over 20 years, we have been testing the Enlist traits and the Enlist products. And all that is to deliver results and provide farmers with better choices. Okay, and just to break down some of these numbers a little bit more, Enlist cotton was launched in 2017. That was the first traded crop that we had come to the market. And since then, we're on more than 150 million acres today with Enlist. This is our eighth consecutive year. Back in 2025, this was our eighth year of market share gains. So we continue to see improvements there. And again, you saw on the last slide, we're at about 65% trait penetration in the soybean space. Out of that 65%, we see that we're roughly on about 75% spray rate. So out of that acres that are planted, roughly 75% of that is getting treated with Enlist. And one point to bring is, again, the clear difference in the countryside compared to dicamba. Some of those is the volatility aspect, the drift aspect that we have in the reduced drift. We are able to go in the tank with glufosinate. We are able to go in the tank with AMS. We really see very few restrictions on our labels when it comes to time of day or time of year as far as applications go. And as of right now, we're very uncertain where the dicamba situation is going in the future. And we are confident that we are at least labeled through 2029 and further. And then once again, reliable supply, American-based company here. All right, so that was the recap of 2025. So now what we'll do is this presentation, like Kelly said, is kind of broke into two sections. The first part is we'll go through some best management practices there, and then get into some frequently asked questions in the second part of that. And even though you may be in an area of high adoption today, the reason we like to go through the BMPs is there's a lot of new people coming to the Enlist system every year. So it's always good to kind of refresh there. Let me see. All right, so as you look at the system as a whole, again, I'll say flexibility. When you look at whether it's our Enlist E3 soybeans, our Enlist corn, whether that's PowerCore, PowerCore Ultra, Vorseed, and then our Enlist cotton, all three of those traded crops come with 2,4-D choline tolerance, glyphosate tolerance, and glufosinate tolerance. And as you look at in the corn, with that trait, it also brings in some FOP tolerance as well. Not saying that you have to use all of these, but given your situation, if glyphosate still works for you, that's a great option. If not, we have the ability to go in with glufosinate and also the FOP. All right, so looking at the crop protection side of things, we have two products that are on the market today. I will briefly mention Enlist Duo. It is getting phased out, but we do have some still in the channel. So you may see it here and there. Over time, it will get phased out. And the reason for that is about 90 to 95% of the product that we spray is Enlist One. So Enlist Duo is a premix. It's got 2,4-D choline and glyphosate. So again, if glyphosate still works for you and that is preferred to have a premix, again, some of that is still available. That product itself does have more stability than a lot of 2,4-Ds and glyphosates mixed together, especially sometimes in colder weather, it may settle out. So it's a very stable product. Enlist One is a straight goods 2,4-D choline. So it's in there by itself and it has Colex D technology built into it. With that, we do have a lot more flexibility with our tank mix partners. I think there's over 1,800 products that you can legally mix with Enlist One, including your glyphosate and glufosinate. So as you're looking at putting out a fungicide or insecticide or any type residuals, Enlist One is the product that will be the most flexible for you. And then again, at the bottom, there's a lot of common, hard to control weeds that 2,4-D choline is very active on. All right, so now we'll get into the best management practices here. This is a very high level BMPs, very general. And I know a lot of this doesn't come as a surprise to many of you. This is a very general weed management program. So Enlist is no exception to that. So as we get into that, we can talk through weed height, the rates, nozzles, different things like that. All right, so looking at the first slide, and we'll go through a lot of data here, and some of this is greenhouse trials, some's multi-year data, large plot, small plot, but in this particular set of data, we're looking at weed height and how that impacts weed control. So we've got three different weeds here, and we're looking at 2 to 4 inches, 5 to 6 inches, and then 10 to 12 inches. And obviously 10 to 12 is off label. We want to try to get those weeds as small as they can be when you spray them. So as you look at the 2 to 4 inch with just Enlist one by itself, you're getting very good control across the board. As you move higher, some species may be easier to control, like common ragweed. You're still getting very good control at 5 to 6 or even 10 to 12, but it starts dropping off on many of those hard to control weeds once they get above that 2 to 4 inch. And a big reason for that is because of this. So as weeds grow, the growing points multiply. So in this illustration here on a 2 inch weed, there's roughly 9 growing points. Once you go to 3 to 4, you're looking at 14. As you go to 4 to 6, 18, and then even taller than that. Again, here there's not enough fingers or toes, I believe, to count all of those growing points there. And this is why coverage is key also. So not only the weed height, but getting good coverage, because if you're using a product that's a contact that's needing to get down into that plant, you want to try to get it where there's fewer growing points as possible. So we looked at weed height. Now we'll kind of look at some drought environmental conditions here. So this is on water hemp and looking at moisture levels. So these were greenhouse trials. You'll see the rates here are very reduced. So 2,4-D is at a quarter rate, glyphosate a 3/4 rate. And that's usually because in the greenhouse, we can kind of manipulate those conditions. We tend to get better weed control. So we go at a lower rate just to tease out some data better. But looking at a no stress situation with 2,4-D on water hemp, you're looking at about 83%, with glyphosate about 85% control. And again, these are lower rates, so we would expect a little less control. But as you introduce drought stress prior to the application, so this was introduced in the greenhouse 7 days before the herbicide application, the control dropped by around half. So for 2,4-D, it was a little less than half, but for glyphosate, more than a half. So a significantly reduced control there when drought was introduced prior to treatment. When it was introduced after treatment, again, we see a little better control, but still a lot less than in a no stress environment. And you would expect that if you sprayed and then you got a drought 7 days later, you would hope that weed has taken in some of that product and had rapid uptake there. So the point here is anytime the weeds are not actively growing, you see a reduction in weed control. And again, looking at the percent reduction down at the bottom, about 42% with 2,4-D and 53% with glyphosate if that drought happens prior to application. All right, so now we talked through weed height and environmental conditions. Now let's look at kind of using a full rate. So in our original label, Enlist one had a rate range. So it was 16 to 32 ounces. When we went through re-registration, we put one rate. And that's because we want to use the full rate. We don't want to promote resistance. We see better control there. So as you kind of look through these numbers, and there's a varying level of trials that were done. So the numbers under each weed species, that's the number of trials it was in. So this is an average collection of many trials. But as you get into the full rate of 32 ounces, it really starts to stabilize and kind of get rid of some of that variability and up and down throughout the weed spectrum. And then looking at the bottom, one thing that we've always promoted as a company with the Enlist system is to use 2 effective modes of action. And that's the reason why, as you see in the numbers, once you add in a glyphosate or even a glufosinate, if that's your product of choice, it even further gets rid of that variability. All right, so once you get the right weed height, you get the right rate, we want to try to get the right nozzles, okay? On enlist.com, you can find all the approved nozzles. There's a large number of those. What I would say is just pick a nozzle that gets you the right spectrum of control, and we'll talk through some of that later. the right quality of spray, get the right gallons per acre. A lot of times we want to be in that higher end of the PSI range when you pick those nozzles, just in the event you slow down at the ends or have issues in the field, you're still within that rate range. So there's a wide variety of nozzles. Just please go on the website in our product use guide. There's this whole list available to you. And just as an example on nozzle selection, what we have here is we have two nozzles, an AIXR, which is a coarse nozzle, and a TTI, which is an ultra coarse. So we kind of look at it as on the left an Enlist nozzle, on the right more of a dicamba type nozzle. At 10 gallons per acre with the AIXR, you're getting about 20% coverage. At the same gallons per acre with the TTI, you're cutting that by about a half. Okay. So just the nozzle selection there can play a huge role in coverage. And I know, especially down where I am in cotton country, there are a lot of people that prefer a TTI, and that's okay. It's on the approved list. What I would recommend at that point is to bump that GPA up to 15 to 20 gallons. So as you can see in the bottom right, with a TTI at 20 gallons per acre, you're still seeing very similar coverage to an AIXR at 10 gallons. So just by picking the right nozzle, picking the right gallons per acre, you can adjust to where you get the right coverage. And then so once you pick the right nozzle, you got the rates, you got the weed height correct. Do you have the right deposition aids or adjuvants in the tank? So what this illustration really shows is in the top left, that is a magnified leaf with a drop of Enlist-1 on the leaf. Okay. And that has no adjuvant in it, no deposition aid. And that is zoomed in 1,500 times just to get that droplet to show up in that screen. Okay. As you move over to the right, in the top right, we put an NIS with it. So that's more of a spreader. We had to zoom out to 850 to get that. So much bigger droplet, much better coverage. And then as you move into the crop oils and the MSOs, we had to zoom out even further there. So we're at 650, and you can really start to see the Enlist penetrating through that cuticle and kind of cratering in that leaf, and even more so with the MSO. All right, so again, not to go through all these again, but these are basic best management practices for all weed control programs. Enlist is no different. Doing all these things will preserve the technology and the longevity of our product, which is our goal, and I know it's your goal as well. So I think, Kelly, what we'll do now is we'll switch gears and go through some frequently asked questions there.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. I think to sum up everything that Jared said, the biggest piece of this is the why, right? When you think about spraying Enlist or any herbicide, the biggest thing we're focused on are kind of broken out into two components. One, of course, weed control. You want to have reduced competition in those fields to really maximize your yield potential. So that's what we're talking about. That's what Jared covered really well in terms of how we spray it and what we're doing to make sure that we hit those weeds. The second is that spray efficacy and overall weed resistance management. What's in the tank and how we approach these fields is extremely important to make sure that we're using effective modes of action and that we're retaining the integrity of the system for as long as possible to reduce our resistance year over year. So with that, I want to pass it on over to Ron for a few frequently asked questions here. So I will advance forward. So Ron, should I use AMS or other spray adjuvants, and at what rate with Enlist herbicide?
All right, Kelly. I guess the short answer is yes, and we'll kind of go into the reasons why. And let's take each one of these individually. So as far as ammonium sulfate, I realize that there are regional differences. You know, when we talk about using these different tank additives in the Midwest, you know, in the high plains, the dry plains, as we'll refer to it, it's a little bit different than when you're down in the Southeast and the water hardness. And we do deal with harder water when we get up into these high plains areas. But what's creating that? These would be these cations, these things like calcium that has a positive charge, and iron, magnesium, manganese, sodium. those are all able to, latch on, if you will, with the herbicide and make the herbicide less effective. So if we can neutralize that in the water before the herbicide hits the water, then the neutralizing agent is what binds up to these positive charged products. And then that just leaves the herbicide to be free floating in the water. That's essentially what we're trying to do. Ammonium sulfate does that very well. In addition to that, ammonium sulfate also helps to help with the absorption and the uptake and the movement within the plant. And that's an extra bonus that you get from ammonium sulfate. So looking over at the chart, what we've done here is we compared deionized water. Okay, so we've taken all of these elements out, just straight H2O and nothing else. And you can see that alone or with ammonium sulfate, you've got the same amount of control. In this case, we did lamb's quarter control with 2,4-D. And then we selectively added in just one of these elements. So when we added in calcium, it dropped the control, substantially when you did not have ammonium sulfate to neutralize that. And then also with manganese, dropped the control substantially when you did not have that water neutralized. So it's important to have that water neutralized with the ammonium sulfate. And typically, we'll use use rates like 8.5 to 17 pounds, but more commonly we would be recommending something like a 2, 3, 4 pounds per acre use rate. What we're seeing here, greenhouse effect with an extremely low rate of enlist. We use that real low rate of enlist so that we didn't end up with 100% control, and then you can't tell the differences. But these questions are coming up somewhat frequently now. What effect does water pH have on herbicide uptake? Well, here we've got the very light rate and looking at greenhouse conditions across 3 different weed species on a very acidic pH, which incidentally, ammonium sulfate will deliver for you. More of a neutral 6.5 pH and then a very alkali pH of a 9. And you'll notice as the pH drops on some of these species that your weed control then goes up, from a 9 to 6.5, a little bit of an improvement, 6.5 to a 4, a little bit more improvement. So that's the purpose of the ammonium sulfate there. And then looking at the bottom there, when we look at the amount of ammonium sulfate, you're seeing the weed control results being significantly better when we have the ammonium sulfate in there at the recommended rate. What about other adjuvants? So we think of these other adjuvants primarily in the tank to spread, to stick, to reduce evaporation. And then when we get into the oils, to also penetrate that leaf surface and penetrate that waxy layer, which is very common as we get out in our high plains, dry plains area where relative humidity is not a normal thing that it's going to be really high every day. So the 3 different products here, we tend out here in the high plains, we tend to kind of categorize them as good, better, and best in the order that they're listed there. The non-ionic surfactant we would recommend, for that spreading, sticking at a quart per 100. And then when we get to the oils, we're primarily recommending these at a gallon per 100. Now, granted, there are some high surfactant oil concentrates that have lower use rates or lower recommended rates. The point being here, when we're applying on the weeds at the recommended size, going a regular use rate of your additive is fine. But when those weeds are allowed to get above labeled height, not that we ever recommend you do that, we just realize what happens. Boy, you better be looking at those adjuvant labels. Go down to that best for sure. Go to that methylated seed oil and look at what that label on that product recommends as the highest labeled rate. If those weeds are extra big, that's your first line of defense is to, really pour the coals to those adjuvants to make sure that we get a good result on the spray that you put across that field. This is just, re-highlighting what the previous speaker had said. But notice, particularly we talked about that MSO. You don't even hardly see that droplet on the surface. It has absorbed itself into that and cut through that waxy layer. And that's where, at least in our area in Iowa, we've gravitated to methylated seed oil is a recommended additive every tank, every time with our Enlist program. And that's even if you're using, glufosinate as a tank mix or these other tank mixes. One other thing I want to point out is in the tank mixes, Liberty Ultra, if that is a tank mix that you're using with Enlist, the label requires to meet the drift test, the label requires the addition of an MSO with Enlist One and Liberty Ultra. Now, people, I know if you are not used to doing that, your first concern is crop response, and we find that the crop response is very negligible with that tank mixture. Where we will see crop responses is mostly associated with the residual herbicide that's put in that tank mixture, not with the methylated seed oil. Okay, we can go now, Kelly. So when we look at Enlist, we talk about Enlist. The official name is Enlist One herbicide with Col-XD technology. Okay, well, what do we mean Col-XD? Well, D's for drift. Enlist is formulated with a drift agent already as part of the formulation, so there's not a need to add additional drift agents. In fact, what the chart will show you here, you've got the blue lines and you have the green lines. All right, the blue lines are at 15 gallons of water, and the green lines are at 10 gallons per acre of water. Now, where there's a dash, that's where a drift control agent was added, and where it's a solid line, where a drift control agent was not added to your Enlist application. And in either case, whether you're at 20 psi, 40 psi, 60 psi, folks, there's about a 15% drop in coverage with that drift reduction agent added. Why? Well, we've already got the right effective amount of drift agent in the mix. Adding more drift agent, especially if that drift agent just typically moves you to a larger droplet, we end up with a lot fewer droplets because they're larger and fewer of them hitting the leaves, and they're bigger, denser, so more of them bouncing off of those leaves. Let's go ahead to the next slide, Kelly.
Now we're in our question and answer section. Thank you, Ron, for that overview. You're going to hear a lot of themes that are very similar throughout this presentation. So as we go, you're going to hear a lot about how it's not just what products you spray, but a lot of how you spray it, making sure that we've got the right things in the tank to make sure the product is as effective as possible on the weeds emerged, but also that it's staying where we want it to stay and it's really penetrating that leaf. We do have one question in the chat right now in the Q&A portion. So again, as a reminder, if you have questions, please use that Q&A function within Zoom to ask your questions. Ron, I will pass this over to you as you covered AMS, but what are your thoughts of some of the liquid AMS formulations versus the dry in terms of efficacy?
Oh, I mean, liquid AMS is just a matter of somebody else put the water in it for you. So that's perfectly fine. In fact, if I had my druthers, I would start the day with my water for the day, having all of the AMS in that spray solution, give it plenty of time to react. And some of the farmers and custom applicators are buying their AMS in these big super sacks, and then they can put the correct amount in at the beginning of the day, as long as you have agitation so that it's evenly spread within that tender truck or that water holding tank. And then then you don't have to dump the 50-pound bags, one after the other. It's a good way to take care of that. But if you buy it as a liquid AMS to start with, that's perfectly fine. The AMS is in there.
Great. Is there enough oil in residuals like metolachlor to reduce the need for MSO?
We find an improved control every time that we put the MSO in it. Uh, Remember, these adjuvant manufacturers are making adjuvants with the purpose in mind of spreading, sticking, penetrating those leaves, resisting evaporation. The fact that an oil is part of a formulation of a herbicide, but it was never designed to be part of an uptake system. We think of things like Dual. Gosh, we used Dual for 15 or 20 years pre-emerge before we ever even thought about using it post-emerge. And remember, if you were to change the formulation on a herbicide, you're talking millions of dollars and many of years to make those kinds of changes. So just carte blanche making a change to the delivery system of a herbicide uh, because the uses has switched when we have products like methylated oil on the market, and you don't have to, let's just leave the oil production, to the people that make the oils, and then the herbicide to the people that are making the herbicide. So yeah, in short, yes, keep it in there, even though keep the methylated oil in, even though you have a residual herbicide that's formulated as an oil with an oil base.
Great. What research do you have using citric acid instead of AMS as a water conditioner, if any?
Not, I haven't seen much. There've been a little bit of ancillary situations where we've seen some good results with citric acid, and then the next year maybe not as good of results. So I think the verdict's still out on citric acid as an adjuvant. But what we do have, like Jared was saying, since about 2004, we have 20 years of data on your standard adjuvants that we have, the high confidence level in. Anything different in the South there, Jared, with citric acid?
I, I can't add anything to what you said, Ron.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a few more. Thank you all for your questions. This is great. And we'll also have time at the end as well, so feel free to keep thinking about questions that you all have. Would you comment on recommending mixing orders with typical glyphosate, MSO, grass residual, and volunteer corn within that product tank mix? So what is that recommended tank mixing order?
Well, remember the first thing you want in the tank is it's the spray tank, uh, half full of water, or at least a third full of water, and then your ammonium sulfate. Okay, it's a dry material. It's there to, help tie up those cations. So those are one and two. Get plenty of water in there so there's hydration. The next ingredient that we'd recommend in that spray tank is going to be, I'm going to recommend the Enlist One. Here's the thing: if we put raw goods together, okay, remember these products are all water soluble. They're not other chemical soluble. So they've got to go, if you have an inductor unit, you can put them in the inductor, but then they go from the inductor to the sprayer. They don't go stack them up in the inductor. That's the biggest problem. You're going to create all kinds of problems if you do that. So I want to see the Enlist. Then I want to see my residual herbicide. Then I want to see my volunteer corn killer. And then either my Roundup or Liberty. And then finally, we're going to top that off with MSO, or if whatever the condition is, if you're not using MSO, a crop oil or non-anox surfactant. So since we've been going with that mixing order in Iowa, we've essentially eliminated mixing problems with that mixing order.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. I mean, the biggest thing for us and that I've seen is not necessarily the order, it's the time in between products and the mixing and agitation. And Ron hit on it, putting raw products together is we see more problems with that than anything. And what I recommend is just take your time. I mean, 5 minutes isn't going to kill you. Just keep agitation, put a product in, mix it, add more water, and then continue on.
See, Jared, you're in the South where you'll say 5 minutes won't kill you, and people believe that. I get up in Iowa and 5 minutes is an eternity. So
Well, it's
yeah,
better than 30 minutes to an hour cleaning up. So,
very good. But yeah,
All
it's
right.
that time in between, really it comes down to the time in between the enlist and the time in between the Roundup or the Liberty, that there's got to be that time frame built in. And we built that time frame in by by filling that time with a residual herbicide and your clethodim.
Rapid fire, 15 gallons per acre or 20, which is best?
20. Will you go 25? Do I hear 25? That's
Yeah,
more the
sold.
better.
Probably not sold to anyone of applicators on the call. So,
All right.
the last one is Enlist Duo, just questions on why it's being phased out and is it due to resistance of glyphosate? I'll start with this, and Jared and Ron, feel free to join. I think it's overall the demand on the flexibility of the product. We see a much stronger demand for Enlist One to be able to curate their programs and make sure we have that flexibility on hand to be able to use Enlist where needed. Resistance management, having additional products in that tank, effective modes of action, certainly can help where we see resistance. We all on this call know that going out with one mode of action at a time is not great. So it's great to have multiple modes of action in the tank. And overall, the efficiency of Enlist One, we just see a stronger demand on that brand. So, Ron, Jared, anything else you would add to that?
The only other thing I would say is the market shift. When Enlist came out, 80, 90% of the mixtures were enlisting glyphosate. And now, 80, 90% are enlist and glufosinate. So it's kind of not the thing to be doing or the thing that people aren't doing anymore anyway. And our sales reflect that.
Well, that covers most of our questions so far. We will have a second Q&A portion. So thank you all for your engagement. That's all the questions that we see in the chat for now. So we will move on to our frequently asked questions portion. And I will open up. Ron, Jared, feel free to answer whichever of these questions. But why doesn't Corteva promote or support spraying Enlist herbicide alone? So why do we recommend tank mix partners?
Go ahead if you can advance here, but it's really about weed resistance management. When we look at the history of resistant weeds, a lot of what has led us to our problems is single modes of action. When you look at the chart here, these are the different chemical classifications. That first gray bar that got the early jump, well, that's triazine, that's atrazine. And the number of resistant weeds, I mean, you were seeing 60, 70, 80 weeds resistant to atrazine. That got eclipsed with the ALS chemistry. Okay, so you think about ALS, pursuit, pursuit, nothing but pursuit, was used on a lot of the soybean fields. And that quickly had a lot of weed species develop resistance to it. The ACASE inhibitors, those are like your volunteer corn killers. I mean, they still kill volunteer corn, people. Don't panic. But a lot of grasses became resistant to those because it was what we were using. You're going to see the EPSP, if you don't know what that is, that's glyphosate, guys. And you look at the number of resistant species with that. But a lot of those, they were just single modes of action going out there to control, a weed complex. That's a short-term thinking. It's not as if we're getting brand new modes of action coming out every year. It's been a lot of years since a new mode of action has come out here. So really, from day one, we wanted to see tank mixtures with Enlist One. If you think even the tank mixtures that Jared was showing earlier, if you remember, even on glyphosate-resistant weeds, we were seeing improved response with glyphosate, even though we know glyphosate wouldn't kill that population by itself, but you do get that enhancement just by having two modes of action working against a weed, even if one's not, all that effective. But just that combination will stave off weed resistance for a much longer period of time.
Perfect. Jared, I'm going to pass this question over to you. What is the difference between 2,4-D choline and other 2,4-D formulations?
okay. Do you want? Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. So there is a huge difference between 2,4-D choline. Not only is 2,4-D choline the only legal application that you can make on the Enlist system or Enlist-traited crops. and we've seen a lot of issues in the past with dicamba, with unauthorized use or off-target movement. So we don't want to see that with ours. So we knew going into this that we needed to create a product that addressed a lot of the issues that growers face with traditional 2,4-D products. The first of that is less physical drift. So Ron mentioned the Colex D technology. That is our drift package that is in the tank or in the jug already with Enlist One. And that provides about 90% less drift than traditional 2,4-D formulations. And because of that, we only use approved tank mix partners with Enlist One or Enlist Duo. And that is done every year. Anytime a company wants to include a product into our uh, approved tank mix list, we have to submit that and do the test to make sure that it does not compromise that drift control. The second piece to that is the near zero volatility. So unlike dicamba or other products, we wanted a product that didn't require an addition to that tank to reduce the volatility. And so I'll show here in just a minute some of the things we did, but 2,4-D choline between the esters and the amines are 96 to 88% respectively less volatile. The other difference is Enlist was the first herbicide to be evaluated and approved through the ESA risk assessment. So we kind of paved the way, and that goes back to the way we launched the product and the way we have stewarded our product throughout the years. We went through that process, and that's why we have the freedom and the freedom to operate through 2029. All right, Kelly, you can go to the next one. All right, so with that, we have looked at a lot of drift scenarios. Again, this was a large scale drift study. I believe this one was in Wisconsin. So this was a 7.5 acre block that was sprayed, looking downwind at soybeans. Now, if we had a susceptible crop, anything downwind, that would be a no spray scenario. But one thing that we do bring with Enlist is that soybeans are not one of those susceptible crops. But we did see no injury on those beans, and you can see in the graph the distance that it traveled was very minimal. So following the label and doing what you're supposed to do with nozzles and gallons per acre, we rarely see any drift issues. And just to go a little further, again, everybody knows, I believe, that tomatoes are probably one of the most sensitive crops to 2,4-D. And again, in this situation, if tomatoes were downwind, this would be a do not spray scenario. We never want to spray when tomatoes are downwind. But to simulate this, what we did is we looked at two different nozzles. So we had an XR, which is not labeled. It's not an approved nozzle on the Enlist label, and then an AIXR. Okay, so we looked at two different nozzles. We looked at 2,4-D amine formulation and Enlist One, and looked at the distance from the furthest tomato plant that was downwind. Okay, so looking at 2,4-D amine with an XR nozzle, it moved roughly 57 feet. Just by changing the nozzle on 2,4-D amine, it did reduce it, but still it still traveled quite a distance. Moving to Enlist One with the non-labeled nozzle, the XR, still moved 42 feet, but less than even the AIXR with the 2,4-D amine. So moving even further into the AIXR, moved roughly 23 feet. So just with the formulation and looking at different nozzles, we see significant reduction there. And then looking at the spray drift affected area, so of that distance, the area that was affected, we reduced the affected area by roughly 60% there just by changing the formulation and changing the nozzle.
We've got to move somewhat quickly through these, Jared, but if you could cover the last couple notes here, and then we'll turn it over to Ron for our frequently asked questions.
Yeah, I'll hit on the volatility. I think this is probably, especially in my area, this is one of the most important pieces there. And so again, to go back to not having to add anything into the tank like other products, what we did is we actually took the chemical compound of 2,4-D and changed it. So if you notice, without getting into too much chemistry here, on the top you have an uncharged acid and an uncharged salt. And so what 2,4-D is typically the acid is what penetrates into the leaf, and the amines and the choline and the ester salts is what keeps it stable. So we changed the formulation on the chemical structure in 2,4-D choline to actually charge those to charge that acid so it can hold on to the salt longer and keep it more stable on the surface. And that's why we don't require a VRA in the tank with 2,4-D choline. And just to look at the data, again, just showing the difference there in formulation. And real quick, this was a study done down here in Georgia, and we had these all across the country as well. And what we did is we sprayed different blocks with the esters and the cholines and the amines, and we sprayed bare ground, and we put cotton plants in 8 different directions around that sprayed area. And what we saw is up to 70 hours after application, the only detection we could find in the choline getting up and moving was on that first bar to the left. And it was very, very small. You can barely see it. And that was on those first plants. So again, we're very confident in the volatility aspect of 2,4-D choline. And real quick, another difference that we have is that we are proud that we put up to $4 million a day in R&D, and that's for new tools and traits and herbicides. And a lot of our unauthorized 2,4-D formulations, they don't bring that to the ag industry like we do. So with that, I'll finish with that and we can move forward.
All right, we'll do some rapid fire Q&A. So Ron,
Okay.
I'll kick some over to you. So why do I need rainfall or need to worry about rainfall after an Enlist application?
Well, herbicides are absorbed into plants, and we need actively growing plants. Yeah, go ahead and advance if you can there. I think there's a slide on that. But herbicide are absorbed into plants, but we kind of have the notion that once that spray is dried, well, then that's done with absorption, and that is not the case. All right, so when we look at this chart, the red is palmer, you have water hemp, you have giant ragweed, and then horseweed, mare's tail. If you look at the first 2 hours, you're getting, a pretty good jag of that chemical into the plants. But even 4 hours later, 6 hours, or all the way even into 24 hours, there's still more absorption going on. So we design a rain fast period. What our official rain fast period on Enlist is 4 hours. But you can see even on some species, unfortunately, palmer, we'd kind of like a little more time than that, if that's at all possible. But the idea here is, okay, once 65% has been absorbed, you will probably end up with satisfactory results on that field. But certainly you can see where 24 hours will give us much more uptake into those plants. So that's the importance of those rain fast periods.
Perfect. Now, Ron, tell me about dicamba nozzles and spraying with Enlist. What do you have to say on that?
All right. You can go ahead and advance. My wife would say, don't be a smarty pants and say you only use them if you don't want them to work. But that's what we have found in our high plains, dry plains out here, where it's nothing but corn and beans. The movement onto non-target crops like soybean, like non-enlist soybeans or alfalfa, there's such a minimal effect that we stay away from those dicamba approved nozzles. My idea is you box them up, you put them on the shelf, and do not open until using dicamba. We just don't use that with anything else but dicamba. Well, why? Those dicamba approved nozzles put out extremely coarse droplets, ultra coarse droplets that are designed to keep the spray on target. That's number 1, 2, and 3 as to why those are designed. Well, what we want is the best coverage that you can possibly get, and extra coarse, ultra coarse is not going to give us. Why? It's because of the size of those droplets. You take the same volume at 500 microns, getting 1 drop on a leaf in this example. That same volume at 250 microns will give you 8 drops on the leaf. And oh, by the way, each of those 8 drops are significantly lighter than the 1 drop. So the chance that they just fall off of that leaf is substantially less. Or you go down to 250 microns, where things are getting pretty fine, and then you get a much more coverage. So it's all about getting that right droplet size that will give us, keep it on the field, but give us the most droplets possible.
That is great. I'll jump
And the
forward.
dicamba nozzle do not do that. Oh yeah, one other example here. Here you're just looking, now this is Liberty on big weeds, but it sure makes a good visually point. With the TTI, the dicamba approved nozzle, you can see all the green in there just by switching to the approved nozzle, AIXRs, you have much better control. And then of course the one clear to the right where we put the Enlist with the glufosinate, you can improve the control that much better.
Right. As Corteva's bringing Enlist herbicide tolerance to corn, how do we
Mhm.
go about weed resistance management and how do we manage that?
Okay, well, let's move ahead on slide here. So first thing I want to say is having that tolerance trait in the corn doesn't guarantee that Enlist will be used in the corn. We'd like to see Enlist used, but it is an option, and we like to bring solutions and options to farmers. Peace of mind. When we look at about 20% of the corn market receiving dicamba, which is a group 4 herbicide, just like Enlist, um, that 20%, has the risk of whatever movement dicamba would bring you, plus the crop response that we've got a little ahead of me there. The crop response that we would normally see with the dicamba, the twisting and some of those things. So neighbor-friendly application plus the crop safety. The other part of this is it's imperative that we look at Enlist in corn as being additive, not a replacement, but an additive to our already good measures that we're using in corn. If you feel the need that you've got to have a group 4 because of weed problems, your choices now are a group 4 dicamba or now with the Enlist corn, Enlist on those same acres. But this is additive, not a replacement for good weed resistance management.
Perfect. I think
Um,
that covers right
yeah,
there.
it covered.
And we covered this a little bit earlier, but why is glufosinate not working on weeds with or without Enlist one herbicide? So any commentary on that being sprayed alone?
Well, phosphonate's always been a little bit fickle. You have to have the right weather conditions. Yeah, go ahead and advance if you would.
Yep.
So when you look at the glufosinate label, glufosinate weed height is 3 inches or less. Well, why? Well, because you got to penetrate and touch every growth point. And as that plant gets larger, not only are there more growth points, but they get hidden by the growth points that are above them or the leaf surface above them. Glufosinate also has to have the ammonium sulfate, which is good. I'd like to see that in our Enlist applications as well. You have the growth stage restriction is when there's a flower out there, you're done spraying glufosinate. You want to keep that gallonage up to 20, and I see again where people have maybe cheated on that 20-gallon rate, and that's going to reduce your activity. You do have optimum nozzles that deliver good performance with the Enlist that stays on target. But then also, we're looking for those smaller droplets, especially in the glufosinate, to get more droplets out there. They like the sunny, warm, humid conditions as well.
I will jump forward. Ron, how is Enlist on kochia?
This is where we always go with the glufosinate tank mixture, but the key to kochia control, and really the key to good best management practice on any weed, is start with a strong residual herbicide. So in the case of kochia, since a lot of kochia will germinate in February, March, and April, before we're thinking of planting out in the high plains here, a fall application makes good sense, or an early pre-emerge application or early burn down material. So whether that's a Valor Sonic, Metribuzin, we like to use Kyber Pro on our kochia acres. And then when it comes post-emerge, we're going to hit that with Enlist and the maximum labeled rate of glufosinate to get complete control on the kochia.
Perfect. Two more questions and then we'll go to the chat. Why do Enlist soybeans show cupping?
Um, with all the acres out there of Enlist, 65% of the total acres are out there. If you do have off-target movement, odds are it's going to be hitting an Enlist field. So Enlist is going to take a disproportionately large percentage of the of those acres. But it's really the either off-target movement from treated fields of dicamba or the lack of sanitation within our system, whether that's a sprayer that wasn't, amply cleaned out, or tender equipment, or inductor units, or even something as simple as like a measuring device. If it has low doses of dicamba in it, you're going to see that on non-dicamba beans, and the majority of those are being Enlist.
And last question here for you, Ron. What nozzles should I use with pulse width modulation systems and Enlist?
Okay, yeah, go on to that. Um, the nozzles that are recommended here, we got a few slides on this on the pulse width modulation. They're specifically listed here. Now, what we have in our Enlist nozzle selection guide, you'll see those that are listed with a green bar and those that are listed with a yellow bar when you get over into those pressure ranges. Green is good and go. Those are the ones that are giving us the maximum performance and still adequate drift control. What you're seeing here with the yellow bars are the ones that have maximum drift control. So I'm thinking down south of Jared, where you're next to cotton everywhere. In that area, you might want to lean a little more towards some of these if off-target movement to cotton is a concern. But where off-target movement in the Midwest out here, where it's just corn, beans, maybe some alfalfa, make sure that they're listed on the approved list, but also have a green bar next to those, showing that it's the best combination of drift control and spray coverage.
Perfect. Well, I will pass it over, Jared, to you for summary, and then we will answer some Q&A questions.
Yeah, thank you. You can go to the next slide. I know we have 3 minutes left until the top of the hour, so we will be respectful of your time. Again, thank y'all for coming. But one last point is there are a ton of resources on enlist.com. As always, reach out to any Corteva employee that you know. But on enlist.com, up at the top, there's several resources there. Product use guide, which is very handy. Application guides, tank mix sequence guidance. I know there's always questions on that. And then looking forward at kind of our stewardship standpoint, we try to bundle a lot of things together just to make sure our customers and applicators and growers have everything they need. So with that, Kelly, I think we'll wrap up, and I think we can stay on a couple minutes. If you have to go, by all means, go about your day. But if anybody wants to hang around, I think we'll stay on for a couple more minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got about 6 questions here. So knowing it's the top of the hour, if you have to go, absolutely fine. We will stay on to answer these few questions. And again, if you've got any more, add them into the chat. So the first one is, can I use Enlist One on fallow ground?
Yes, you can. In fact, we do that as an early pre-plant burn down. And so it is labeled to do so.
Perfect. If applying boron with Enlist One, when should it be applied in the tank fill order?
The very last. I
Very
forgot to
last.
mention that one. Yes.
And we're going rapid
But-
fire. These are easy one-liner answers. So questions on, isn't it better using Roundup with the Enlist system as it affects the plants? Sorry, the questions jumped.
Well, I think I get where he's going here.
Yes.
I do like the harmony of Enlist with glyphosate, provided the glyphosate is still working on the weed spectrum that you're after. We get over here into Iowa, and water hemp is weed problem number 1, 2, and 3, and the glyphosate is not doing much for the water hemp. We get much better results when Liberty is our tank mix partner, even though Liberty kind of goes in quick and burns, and Enlist, you like to have that, it's a slower uptake, and it's translocated. If anybody's finding themselves in a 2-spray program post-emerge, where they know they have to go 2 post-emerge applications, and some of my buddies over there in Nebraska are doing that with their Palmer amaranth problems, what makes the most sense is Enlist glyphosate and then wait about 7 to 14 days and then hit it with Liberty for exactly the reason that you outlined here. But that's what we'd recommend if you're in a two post spray program.
That's helpful, Ron, because the question was more about timing. So thank you for
Mhm.
covering that one. Um, is there preference using clethodim over glyphosate in the Enlist system, likely with glufosinate? Also, any data suggesting a certain form of glyphosate salt over another?
Well, I'll go ahead and handle that. With the clethodim, I'm thinking you're probably talking as far as grass control goes.
Mhm.
And I do want to make this point, and people don't necessarily know this, but we will typically use around 8 ounces of clethodim to control volunteer corn. But that corresponding size of grass, annual grass, is a 12 or 16 ounce rate. So it takes a lot more clethodim for grass control than what your volunteer corn rates of clethodim are. So you got about double that rate. Um, I think the plus you have with glyphosate is it's also bringing broadleaf weed control. But if Liberty is in the mixture, then that's kind of a moot point. I think there was more to that question I maybe missed.
Yeah, it was
It-
the preference on glyphosate.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, from my standpoint, I don't really have a preference. I know the K salts are very popular. We have growers that use all different kinds. I don't think there really is a preference. I will point out the K salts do tend to mix a little harsher. So just going back to our mixing conversation we
Mhm.
had previously, just make sure that if you are using a K salt, just be extra careful and take time in between and mixing those.
Yep.
Perfect. Ron, you had mentioned MSO in a tank mix with Enlist and Liberty Ultra. The question said, did you say that the MSO is required with Enlist and Liberty Ultra?
Yes, it is in order for it to pass the drift test. I mean, we're looking at a couple things here. This is stewardship, the right to operate. When Enlist and Liberty Ultra are together, MSO is a required adjuvant so that it passed the drift test. And of course, those of us that want MSO in the tank anyway are like, great, that's exactly what we wanted there anyway. So it's a good thing.
Perfect. And that leads me into the next question. Someone had asked, just to double check, no extra DRA is required with Enlist 1, correct?
Correct.
Very, very good. Can you explain the details of runoff mitigation?
Do you want to take that, Jared, or?
I mean, I have a not
I'll
as
take
much
it there.
experience, but if you want to take it, I do know that there's certain points that you have to get based on your soil type. And I think it's up to you to keep track of that. I don't think it's required to keep it written, but in the case of being audited or whatever, there are on the label there are different point values associated to different mitigation measures, whether that's vegetative strips or no-till versus different tillage types. So that it is laid out on the label on the different point values associated to that. So just making sure that you know how many points you need versus how many points that you've basically taken and keeping track of that.
As far as I
There's a
know,
follow-up. Oh, sorry, there's a follow-up question with the runoff mitigation. So this may be this a tack on, but runoff mitigation scoring soil types require 6 credits. How can I get enough points with conventional tillage and weed pressure requiring 2 applications of Enlist?
that's going to probably require you on, sloped soils. That would also be another problem to have some buffers at the end of those fields if runoff is occurring. That you've got a grass buffer to catch that runoff water and filter it before it gets into the streams. Terraces as well, if you have a lot of slope to your fields. I think the thing we got to understand, Enlist was the first product that had this mitigation. The Liberty Ultra was the second product to have this. But as products get re-registered, it's just more and more. They're all going to have to comply with this runoff mitigation. And you think of things like Enlist and Liberty that aren't necessarily known for their long residual control. We start getting some of these residual products out there, and they may just be requiring that many more points. So if you've got issues with slope, and you better be starting to think, how am I going to border this field so that I've got a sediment catch as things come off of those fields, that it's going to be better, that it's going to be filtered out before it hits that river system. Um, these things are just going to escalate. It's all part of good stewardship, just like Jared talked about using the Enlist technology is good stewardship. I think of us customers here, we all want to pass this land on to the next generation. So that means doing everything right that you possibly can.
Great answer. Have you done any work with fulvic acid as a way to improve plant uptake of Enlist?
I have not, Jared.
I haven't either.
Good
Yeah.
question. Stump the
Stop
host.
it.
There you go.
Hey,
All right.
last
The
year,
last, yeah. Liberty Ultra requires MSO, HSMSOs, or HSCOC. Doesn't have to be MSO, just a point of clarification in that question. So just
Okay, I did not
questioning
know
on,
the HSCOC had been approved. And I'm sorry, when I said MSO, I should have also mentioned that was HS MOC. That's fine.
good clarification with the Liberty
Yeah,
Ultras. That
thank you,
makes
whoever
everybody.
added that.
Mhm.
and
Um,
if you look, just to throw on the end of that, if you look on the enlisttankmix.com, it specifically highlights, because there's a lot of adjuvants and there's a lot of different names. People call them MSO and they're really something else. So it really, if it is on the Tank Mix website, it is specifically listed next to HSCOC, HSMSO. So it categorizes that very well on the website.
all right, the last one might be a loaded question. What is the best residual to use with Enlist?
Well, that is loaded.
Loaded question.
I
And
want you to
Versa.
use Inversa. Um, and why? Because of the encapsulated acetochlor formulation. It drives to the soil. It helps it to not have the crop response on the soybean plants. And those are two big benefits that Inversa brings to the market that other formulations, don't bring that level to. The idea with the residual product, though, is to get it, on soon enough that you have time for that moisture to activate it to get it, into the system. And Inversa, meets those needs as well.
That's great. Well, that is all the questions that we have. We know we're 8 minutes over, but thank you for everyone who was able to stick with us and join today. Hope you found this informational, great use guides. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to look at enlist.com. You can find more. These webinars will also be posted onto YouTube. So if you want to go back right before the spraying season starts, you can certainly do that as well. And as a reminder, there is one CEU credit that will be applied to your account within 45 days, so you will get credit for your participation and engagement. Thank you so
Mhm.
much for the questions and the engagement. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.